And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. We are going to jump right into this Champions League group stage preview, starting with Group A: Ajax, Liverpool, Napoli, Rangers. Ajax still perfect in the Eredivisie, not the most impressive performances in the world outside of one or two. There's been some one goal wins in there, but it's also a league that probably doesn't get enough credit in terms of the difficulty week to week. Ajax doesn't run away with this thing and lose, one game and drop 4 points in a season. They take some lumps. PSV is, right there. But so far, so good for Ajax. And don't forget how good Ajax were in the group stage of the Champions League last season. I think it's easy to gloss over this because they just got unlucky in the round of 16. And so they kind of exited the conversation quickly. That team was in a position to make a run at another semifinal, and at that point, who knows what happens. That team was on the same level as the team that nearly beat Tottenham and got to the Champions League final. This version lost an incredible amount. Sebastian Haller, Antony, Ryan Gravenberch, you go down the list. So that's the one thing I'm really curious. The big question for me about Ajax heading into this Champions League group stage is how close can they get to the team last season? Because to me, the team last season gets out of this group. And maybe even does so pretty comfortably. This group, I'm not so sure. Napoli have looked awfully good going forward. And again, a team that has lost a lot and really sort of rebuilt. I'm still not convinced their ceiling is all that high, which is why I still think Ajax have a really, really good chance of getting out of this group. But if, for whatever reason, Ajax struggle a little bit, Napoli is scoring goals for fun, more or less, in Serie A. So this is very much three teams. To me, this is the second best trio of teams in a group. And they're not number one, and there's a clear gap between number three. They are just number two with a cushion on both sides, which is where Rangers got really, really unlucky. This is the team that just got past PSV, who are hanging in there with Ajax. And they did drop points in the Scottish Premiership. They drew Hibs. John Lundstrom, red card. They were winning, ended up giving an equalizer. It's a draw, not the end of the world. Couldn't be the difference between winning and losing the league. But from a how they are playing and what it means for the Champions League standpoint, not putting too much stock into that. In another world, I really like Rangers' chances of at least getting into the Europa League and making a real run at getting into the knockout stage. But I look at this group and I could see potentially, if things go well, a Europa League. Right? This is a team that just went to the final of the Europa League, beat some pretty impressive teams to get there. This is a very, 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 very good Rangers team who got an incredibly unfortunate draw. And then the final team in here, of course, is Liverpool. I just talked about some of the concerns. Not going to go more in depth and keep belaboring the point about Liverpool. Cover them plenty in other parts of this show. The one thing I want to say, though, is when they had those disappointing Champions League showings, it's not the group stage. Maybe it's a poor game here or there. But the Atletico Madrid situation, Real Madrid, and that disappointing performance in the Champions League final, right? They are not a team that has a difficult time getting out of the group stage. It hasn't been great so far. They certainly are vulnerable, especially at the beginning here before they get everybody healthy. And the depth in the injuries is always going to be a question. I will believe two of these teams finish ahead of Liverpool when it actually happens. Group B, Atletico Madrid, Bayer Leverkusen, Club Brugge, Porto. This is perhaps the most wide open group. Atletico Madrid are certainly your favorites. They've been up and down so far. Bad performance in their loss against Villarreal. There's been some frustration on the transfer front. It's kind of an odd group of players right now. That has also been the case in the past where I don't view them as legit La Liga title contenders. But like clockwork, they show up and make your life incredibly difficult in the Champions League. And they have the benefit of a very favorable group, so I fully expect them to top it and at the very least go through. Porto have struggled on the road, already lost in their league. This is a team I was high on and still, quite honestly, really like their setup here in terms of potentially getting to the knockout stage. But they haven't exactly been as consistent as I would like so far. Bayer Leverkusen, 1 win, 3 losses in the Bundesliga. However, the numbers paint a much brighter picture. And I do expect them to sort of turn things around. This is a very good team. One of the 4 or 5 best in Germany. I would argue 4 from a talent perspective. Again, you got to feel really good if you're Leverkusen about this draw. Especially if you can kind of put this poor start to the season behind you and start to get things rolling here. And, it could just be for those first 3 weeks of the season, just nothing could go your way. Because like I said, from an expected goal standpoint, from an analytical standpoint, it hasn't been catastrophic. They've been incredibly unlucky. So if they can just sort of turn things around, absolutely they are right there. And then you got Club Brugge, currently 3rd in the Pro League. 4 wins, a draw, a loss. Certainly the 4th team in this group. However, it is worth pointing out they got a home draw against PSG and won at Leipzig last season in a much more difficult group. Absolutely, I could see a world in which they beat Porto or beat Leverkusen, take a point off Atletico Madrid, and really mess things up. I still expect them to finish 4th. I feel pretty confident in that. But don't be surprised if somehow they end up determining who finishes 2nd, who finishes 3rd in this group, and makes it closer than maybe it appears it should be on paper. Then we go to Group C. This is your big 3, so to speak. Bayern, Barcelona, Inter Milan, and poor Victoria Pilsen living their best lives out here back in the Champions League. They were last in the group stage in 2018-19. You're going to have some incredible memories getting to play these teams, these players. There's just no other combination. If I'm a 4th team in a group, this is the one place I absolutely wanted to avoid. Good luck to you, Victoria Pilsen. Wish you all the best. It'd be awesome if you found a way to even make the Europa League. Bayern are looking just fine. I'm not worried about what Borussia Mönchengladbach can do to them. It just seems to happen all the time, and they still run through the Bundesliga. Barcelona have really picked things up after that disappointing draw to open the season. Robert Lewandowski is scoring brilliant goals and scoring goals in the first minute of the game. They are looking like the team they were supposed to be when they spent all this money to get themselves back to a point where they could contend for the Champions League. And then your other team, of course, is Inter Milan. And perhaps the single thing I am most interested in when it comes to the Champions League this season is what Serie A teams can do. And this is the best example of it. There are a couple other ones we haven't gotten to yet who should get through their groups. It's not a guarantee, though, but they should. Going back, the last quote-unquote good run from a Serie A team in the Champions League was Atalanta when they nearly beat PSG in the single leg condensed knockout rounds after the pandemic hit. Right? It's a bunch of Juventus losing in the round of 16 to teams they shouldn't. And it's the team who wins the league the year before not even getting to the Europa League. It happened to Inter, and then it just happened to AC Milan. At some point, these teams need to show up. And now you got Lukaku back. Now he's currently injured. He's going to miss at least this first game, it sounds like. But you better show up, Inter Milan. And if you do finish third, okay. Understandable. Better make a deep run in the Europa League, though. This is very much, for me, Serie A legacy time. And getting your reputation back and proving you can compete with the best teams in the world. Because, yes, Bayern has been there, except for last season. Right? You got PSG, you got the Premier League teams, Real Madrid. But in a world where Barcelona's down, Bayern were down last season, there were semifinal spots for the taking. And nobody from Serie A has stepped up. And now we are in year 3 of Juventus not being the only team capable of winning this whole thing. The Milan teams are the ones really letting this league down right now when it comes to Champions League. They are in very different situations when it comes to their group. But this is go time. Inter Milan, let's see what you're made of. This is a great opportunity to restore part of Serie A's reputation by getting out of this group and maybe even topping it. At least getting out of it and making a deep run and getting to the quarterfinals, getting to the semifinals. Because I'm going to lay out the scenario here where it's another incredibly disappointing year for Serie A. They have their work cut out for them. And a big part of that is what Inter Milan does in this incredibly difficult group. Then we go to Group D, Frankfurt, Marseille, Sporting Lisbon, and Tottenham. Frankfurt are just hard to make sense of. It's just kind of been up and down. You know, Bayern ripped them to shreds at the beginning of the season. This is, of course, the team coming off of a Europa League triumph, which is how they got here, because they were nowhere near one of the best teams in Germany last season. They do only have losses to Bayern and Real Madrid this season. There are also some draws in there to mid-table Bundesliga teams. But they know how to do it in the knockout tournament. They just did it last season. So I honestly am still trying to figure out exactly what to expect from them in this group that is very, very open outside of Tottenham, who I certainly consider the favorites. It hasn't been the greatest start. Again, I just went over this, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But they still look the part, kind of. I'm not going to back off of my confidence in them yet, especially in this group. Your other two teams, Sporting Lisbon, really struggling domestically, just one win in their 4 league games so far. And of the teams in this group, certainly the second most impressive, if you're talking about performances this season, is Marseille. Marseille were one of the biggest winners in Europe last season, with the turnaround they had and how far they came from, having fans invading their training ground. It was a really good season, a deep run in Europe, got back into the Champions League, and are absolutely in a position. I would argue they should be the second team coming out of this group. That is something you don't get to say in very many situations, but this draw broke favorably for them, as well as Tottenham. No excuses. This should be your group. You should top it. Those are the two teams I'm looking at. But again, Frankfurt is the wild card for me. On any given day, they can beat anybody. I could also see a world in which they finish 4th in this group. That brings us to Group E, AC Milan, Chelsea, Dynamo Zagreb, Red Bull Salzburg, excuse me. So I talked about Serie A. AC Milan, one of those teams, should go through. No excuses. There are 2 clear teams here, and then there's a clear team 3. and a clear team 4. AC Milan have struggled offensively so far, not off to a horrendous start in Serie A, but not exactly looking likely to repeat as champions either with the points they've dropped so far. I also just laid out all of Chelsea's issues. Not going to harp on that and relive all of that either. But these are the two teams, of course, everybody is looking at. If you're Red Bull Salzburg, it is not a perfect group where you might actually be the second most talented team in it, which is kind of where they really benefited last season. That was a wide open group. Nobody had any clue who the best, worst, second best, third best team in that group was. It was just sort of chaos from top to bottom. Red Bull Salzburg benefited from that. Not the case here. But if you're going to be Team 3 and you're not going to get a huge break in the draw, and you're going to have to play two teams better than you, these two would be pretty high on my list. I already talked about the struggles AC Milan had last season in the Champions League and laid out all my concerns about Chelsea. Again, this is a Red Bull Salzburg team that has lost quite a bit from last season. I get that. But they've also been good so far, and I'm keeping them in my top 25 week after week because they're going to have to play in the Champions League and perform poorly to prove they don't belong there. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt based on what they did domestically last season and the fact they got into the knockout stage of the Champions League. And yes, they got obliterated in the second leg against Bayern, but they held their own in the first. It was a pretty impressive performance. Are they a top 15 team in the world? Top 16 where they should be getting out of the group? No. But I am going to keep them in that 25 range until we see how this starts playing out. Now, it's just hard to know, and that's the difficult thing about Red Bull Salzburg in particular. It's just hard to know from year to year because they sell so many players and the competition level domestically is so low. I just have no good gauge on how good this team actually is. Absolutely, I could see them getting out of this group. I could also see them finishing 4th. They are Team 3 for me, and that's how I expect it to go. But I see two vulnerable favorites, quote-unquote favorites. And I'm going to give Red Bull Salzburg the benefit of the doubt and really look at them as one of sort of the dark horses to pull off an upset in terms of the teams reaching to the group stage until we actually see what they look like at this level of competition. Because like I said, you don't get what you need in Austria to get a good sense of where this team is actually at. Then Group F, Celtic, Real Madrid, Red Bull Leipzig, Shakhtar Donetsk. Real Madrid, clear favorites in this group. Don't need to elaborate on that. It's the Champions League, it's Real Madrid. The question is whether you win the whole thing or not. Red Bull Leipzig should be worried about this group. It's been a slow start. They really started to make some progress and move forward at the end of last season. I was buying what was happening. You finish with your first trophy as a Bundesliga club, and then it's just kind of back to square one and another bad start to the season. Now, Timo Werner did just come in. His return is going to help. But if I'm the other teams in pot 3, pot 4, that I know I'm going to be the quote-unquote underdogs, I am looking at Leipzig as one of the teams I would want in my group. Shakhtar have a win and a draw so far domestically. This is a team that has a track record of success in this competition and in Europe in general for years. They're difficult to play against. They can absolutely cause some problems. And again, in an open group, I'm not ruling them out. Of course, the team that I am most interested in, though, and one of the other big storylines for me in the Champions League, is these two Scottish teams. Celtic, unsurprisingly, perfect domestically. They're outscoring their opponents 21-1 so far. And where this gets really interesting is kind of the logical progression. Rangers nearly won the Europa League last season. Rangers finished behind Celtic in the league, which suggests that Celtic is the more consistent and probably more talented team. But Celtic didn't get to prove it at the highest level. Now they have that opportunity. And they happened to get the very favorable draw. Rangers got the very unfavorable one. So if you know Rangers can do what they did last season, Celtic 100% is going to be a factor in this group. I will be incredibly disappointed as a fan of this sport if Celtic sort of just go down without a fight. I expect them to finish third, but again, Leipzig is vulnerable to me. You can't ask for a much better setup if you are Celtic. There are some quote-unquote big teams I'd rather play than Real Madrid, obviously, but you're not worried about topping your group. You're worried about getting second or third, and you're in a position to have a really, really good chance of doing so in your return to the Champions League. Then we go to Group G. That is Copenhagen, Dortmund, Manchester City, and Sevilla. This is another group with a very clear pecking order. Of course, Manchester City at the top, then Borussia Dortmund, then Sevilla, and then Copenhagen. Manchester City, we're not going to sit here and talk about what they're expected to do in the group stage. It's a waste of time. They always blow everybody out. It is just the reality of Manchester City in the Champions League with their depth and their talent. The one thing I will say, though, that I want to talk about for a second, and we're going to keep going back to this as the season progresses and we get deeper in the Champions League. What you just saw from Erling Haaland again today, another hat trick. Where that really matters for me is not domestically in the Premier League. It is the Champions League. And it is specifically kind of this idea of, again, going back to my philosophies, for me to believe Manchester City are going to do something different in the Champions League, I need to see something different. Erling Haaland is that something different. He gives you different solutions to problems, and he is just a freak. And so that is what I'm looking for Manchester City. That is what intrigues me about this. Is I want to throw it out there from the very beginning that if you're picking Manchester City to win the Champions League, to me it's got to be more than just they're the best team on the planet. Erling Haaland can be that reason why. The rest of this group, Dortmund, Sevilla, both incredibly disappointing so far. Dortmund kind of picked things back up, but they've had to, bad performance they were able to rescue 3 points from. I really thought this might be the year where they're good defensively. It does not look like that is happening. And Sevilla have struggled mightily. Replacing that center back pairing is not going well at all. And Copenhagen has 3 wins and 4 draws in their league so far. I've got more faith in Dortmund than the other two in terms of living up to their potential. I expect Dortmund and City to be these two teams and it not to be that close. Sevilla are phenomenal in the Europa League, but they really struggle for the most part in the Champions League. So to me, this is pretty cut and dry in terms of what we're going to see here. And then our final group, Group H, Benfica, Juventus, Maccabi Haifa, and PSG. You've got your 2 favorites, Benfica's Team 3. Been really impressed with Juventus so far. I've talked about this a little bit. Making things easier on themselves, a little more stress free. Now they're still dropping some points. That ceiling is the problem. I don't see them as legit contenders to win this whole thing. They're just not putting it all together all the time. But in a wide open Serie A, they've been one of the more impressive teams so far. Benfica is also really interesting to me. Perfect in all competitions, which is a boatload of games at this point, because they had to go through, the qualifying, and you've got your domestic league going. And they were quarterfinalists last season. Don't forget that. This is a team, again, they got, I will use the word lucky, to get past Ajax. They were not the better team, but that happens sometimes. They are a team that has found a way to be able to do that. And so I was really, really curious where they were going to end up, and looking at them as one of my dark horses to pull off an upset. I just don't see it in this group. They got a tough draw. They should get into the Europa League, no problem. But that was just about the last place you wanted to end up if you're Benfica. And then Maccabi Haifa, they last made the Champions League group stage in 2009-2010, and were in the Conference League last season, but now moving up to the biggest stage in the sport.